Logic Pro on the iPad. You know what? I think I'd be fully convinced if it wasn't for this one major thing. So I've been using Logic Pro now on the iPad for about a week. And coincidentally, this is also the same period that I've been using an iPad for. See, unlike most creators or YouTubers out there, I'm very much a newbie to the iPad form factor. This is the first one I've ever owned. And very much like other YouTubers and creators, I'm a newbie to Logic Pro on the iPad. Since Apple announced that Logic Pro was coming to the iPad, completely out of the blue, just a few weeks ago, to help spark some songwriting creativity, I thought I'd set myself a challenge and document the whole experience for you guys, so you can learn with me. So if that sounds vaguely interesting to you at all, hit that notification bell down below because you do not want to be missing any of the future videos in this mini-series. So just to recap the challenge that I set myself in the first video in this mini-series, which if you haven't yet, I suggest you do and then come back and watch this video. Link up here to that video on the screen. I've set myself the challenge of making a song from start to finish on the iPad. So record, produce and mix in 30 days. And preferably a song that I'd be proud enough to release as a single, i.e. just before my free trial with Logic expires. Now, don't jump to conclusions, I'm not cheap. I just like the idea of setting completely unrealistic timelines for myself, in the hope that I'll actually get something done. The good news is, I do actually have something now made that vaguely resembles some sort of song. And to date, my experience with the iPad has been somewhat of a mixed bag. Let me talk you through my experience so far. Okay, so if you haven't heard any of my songs in the past, which, let's be honest, you probably haven't, I like music with guitars.
Excuse me, Wayne. Can I put the fender back now, please?
Not today, my good man. I'm feeling saucy.
And ideally, real drums. So this new song that I'm making, whatever it will end up being, will be something that I've written this week on my trusty Les Paul Studio. The problem right now is I just don't have any ideas. So I'm going to have to come up with one. Okay. Idea one. Okay, possible middle-late idea. Not really sure what the melody is, but chords sound pretty cool. Here we go. Okay, so as you saw there, I've got an idea that hopefully has some legs. That chord pattern that I've now recorded and I'm looping, I'm not really sure where it's going to go yet. And it's not really immediately obvious to me what the chorus or the next section of the song should be. So I've just put it into Logic on the iPad and I'm just going to loop it and layer it and see what I can come up with. So what I'm using to record into Logic is the exact same setup as what I'd use on the Mac. I've essentially got the home studio musician starter kit, but in all seriousness, in my opinion, it's kind of all you need. And I'll put links to all of the gear that I'd recommend in the description below if you're interested. So to record guitar, I'm actually using the emulated output from my Fender Tone Master amplifier, and that's going straight into my Focusrite 2i2 audio interface. And I have that going into a USB-A to USB-C adapter. And if you do want a USB-C capable audio interface, you do have to upgrade to the Claret series with Focusrite. And lastly, I have my trusty Audio-Technica ATH M50Xs that I use to monitor my recordings with. Such a mouthful every time I say the name of these things. I think their marketing department might need a few lessons from Apple. With a little guitar melody or riff kind of thing. Not sure where it's going to go in the song, but here it is. Sure how to resolve it yet, so a bit of work to be done, but sounding good. To get started recording guitars couldn't be easier on the iPad. I've just created a new audio track using this button here, and I've made sure that the input on the audio track is the same as the channel that I'm plugged into on the Focusrite. And I've also changed the output of the track to stereo output, so I can then hear my guitar in my headphones. And lastly, I've gone into settings and enabled the low latency mode for recording. Now, just a quick one. For guitar tones and sounds, I'm just using my Boss ME80 multi-effects pedal, which is going straight into the Fender Tone Master. Essentially, so I can have a nice clean tone as a foundation coming straight from the Fender amp, and then I can shape the sound from there using distortion or other effects.
I feel like it's time to make my move, baby child, nothing to say but loves to. Like it's time to win or lose. Polka style, I've gone all in for this round. No, I can't lose. There's nothing can keep me away from you. Yeah, but I'd always stay if I had to choose. Nothing can keep me away from you.
Okay, so I've come up with lyrics and a vocal melody for the first verse. No idea what this song is actually about yet. I've got the line "gone all in for this round," and I'm envisioning this sort of like poker game as a bit of a backdrop. So I'm thinking that maybe the song is about a relationship and going all in on it, using the poker game idea as a bit of a metaphor. Like I'm pushing all my chips forward into the middle of the table kind of thing. We'll see. The plot certainly has some holes in it right now. So I've got this guitar and vocal melody idea, and I want to get a beat down right now to complement it because I've got the groove in my head. I usually record drums live on my kit using a single microphone, which sounds okay, but it takes quite a bit of work in the box to make it sound big. But since I don't have my drum kit here with me in my flat in London, I'm going to attempt to use the step sequencer here to program some drums. I do still want the sound of a live drum kit for this though, or at least something that gets me close. So my experience with the step sequencer in Logic has been super positive so far. As somebody that doesn't usually program their drums, I did find it super easy and intuitive to pick up. Auditioning drums on the left-hand pane is super easy to do, and when you find a sound that you like, you simply just drag and drop it straight into the region. I guess just like you would on a Mac using a mouse, but it's just so much easier on here. Now, because I want my programmed drums to sound real, or real-ish, I need to alter the velocity of each of the hits. Because a human wouldn't hit a snare, for example, at the exact same force on every hit. It would vary, and that's what makes it sound human. This is really easy to do, and really fun to do actually, in Logic. I can just click up here on this toolbar, select velocity, and then alter the velocity for each hit, just by dragging up and down using the Apple Pencil. Super easy. Now, one thing I did want to mention was the battery life on this thing. The battery life is surprisingly good on this thing, considering what we're doing. Logic Pro is quite a CPU intensive application, depending on what you're doing. And I think Apple's done a really good job of optimizing Logic for the iPad. But it's still nowhere near MacBook Pro or MacBook Air territory when you've got stuff plugged into this thing and you're recording real instruments. And this problem is just exacerbated by the lack of ports on this thing. You only get one USB-C port on an iPad, which basically means if your audio interface is plugged in, like mine is, you can't charge it at the same time as recording your instruments, unless you have the Magic Keyboard attached, in which case you get a second port. Not the end of the world by any means, just another inconvenience you have with the iPad that you don't get with the MacBook. Speaking of ports, I do have to mention the absence of a headphone jack here. It works just fine having your audio interface plugged in here. There's no latency with the recordings. But what if I'm on the move? And what if I want to record something? In an ideal world, I'd be plugging in my Audio Technicas straight into my iPad to remove any latency. Now, granted, this is probably more of an issue for video editors, I think, where the sound has to be synced exactly with the A-roll so you know where to make the cuts in the footage. But depending on how bad the latency is, you could probably live without a headphone jack. But remember, Apple recently upgraded the headphone jacks on the MacBook Pros to high impedance, and they probably did that for a reason. Okay, back to the song. I've got that looping chord pattern, and I've got an idea for a vocal melody. I've also now got an idea for a chorus or some sort of bridge, but I'm not entirely sure yet where it's going to go, or how many times it's going to be repeated, or even if it's going to be repeated. So yeah, the song arrangement just isn't very clear in my head yet. I also have an idea for an interlude with that guitar lick that I showed you earlier. I do need to get all of this stuff recorded into Logic now though, so I can move stuff around and chop stuff up and come up with some sort of sensible arrangement. Right, I do not like this at all. No, not the song, thank God. I think that could actually end up being half decent. But the experience on the iPad when you're arranging a song is just so tedious and fiddly. Whenever I attempt to move around some of the tracks or chop them up or select multiple at any point, I just get so frustrated with it. And I just find that like there are too many false touches. Like when I go and try and select multiple, either I'm being really clumsy or sometimes I accidentally select something else in the process. It just doesn't feel that precise to me. And I just kept thinking when I was trying to do this earlier, my God, I just wish I could use my MacBook for this. And I have to confess something here. I have to come clean. In the end, I actually did end up moving the file from the iPad to the Mac just so I could move the tracks around and get an arrangement. I just found it so frustrating to copy and paste and move tracks around on this thing to try and figure out the arrangement, but I have now ported it back to the iPad. For me personally, I just found the whole thing too much. For this particular task on arrangement, MacBook Pro 1, iPad 0. So, to sum up my thoughts so far, the iPad is just fantastic at recording live instrumentation at home with a simple USB audio interface, with a USB-C adapter. Particularly if you're just getting started at recording at home, this is a perfect first device. And if you guys get to try this out for yourself, I think you'll just love how intuitive and easy the application is to learn. In particular, I quite like the tactile nature of the drum programming. It's actually quite addictive being able to play the beats in, which sounds very strange to say in the modern day because that's exactly what you're you'd be doing if you were playing real drums, but you get what I mean. The tactile nature of the iPad is just great for that kind of thing. However, for me personally, and bear in mind I've only had the iPad for about a week now, editing is where the iPad seems to fall down a little bit. Moving tracks around, looping, trimming down, selecting multiple, these kind of gestures is just so frustrating on the iPad. And using the touch interface to do this stuff is just really fiddly. And it's just easier, better and faster on a Mac. But overall, Logic does work really well on the iPad. And remember, this is literally the worst Logic will ever be on the iPad since it's version 1. So with that said, do join me in the next video where I need to take these sound scratchings that I've created on this thing and try and turn them into an actual song. Production is next. Stay tuned, the next video should be super interesting. Subscribe if you're new, and if you missed the first episode in this series where I actually go out and buy an iPad for this whole experiment, keep watching for a link to that video. See you in the next one.